Just go right ahead.
Okay, so then moving on to the balance sheet. So what this does is it really shows you where we're at, you know, where our financials position is. Income statement tells you how did we do this year. This is, balance sheet is your overall, where are we at, you know? What do you have in your checking account versus what do you owe your credit card company? That's a balance sheet. So the assets, you can see that there's cash, there's investments. The investments are held at Vanguard Group, so that's the money that we've mostly earned the 1.8 million off of. Yes. Yes.
Just for context.
Sure.
Am I right in saying that when we get to the bottom line here, that's the number in addition to our claims number? What is the number to which we look when we talk about our net?
Net position, so there is, at the third section, there's assets, there's liabilities, and there's net position.
Oh, it's right there.
So you can see that we started net position at 39.8 million for help,
Okay.
the change.
What is 39 million is an absolute number. Our net position.
We're gonna go over all this on a different way to look at it in a minute.
In a minute.
On the rating.
Continue. I didn't.
No, that's okay.
Keep
All
going.
right, all right. So you know, for assets, we have our cash, we have our investments, we have money that's still due from the school districts, contribution receivable, so that's some premiums that went out that hadn't been paid yet for June mostly, and some for May. We have some other miscellaneous receivables. Most of that is $300,000 due back in the pharmacy arena. And we have a little bit of interest because things post the following month. We have a little bit of prepaid expenses, which means those are bills that we've paid out. We had to pay them before June 30th, but they really are FY20 expenses. But for some reason, usually it's insurance. You know, the insurance people don't want to wait for their money. And then we have working fund deposit. And what that is that's $4.5 million that Blue Cross Blue Shield holds. It's our money. But, you know, you figure it helps them with their cash flow because they're doing claims, you know, we're reimbursing them, but they're having to move things through the system and pay bills and pay expenses. So they keep that money on hand. And it represents basically 1 week's worth of claims and it's adjusted each year. So, but it is our money. And then on the liability side, this is, like I said, like our credit card bills. This is what we owe. So we have $328,000 in expenses that belong to FY19 that we hadn't paid yet. So those are things like legal bills that came in after the fact, or you know, things like that. 6.8 million in claims payable. So that's that 4 million I was just referring to. That's IBNR plus the last week of claims because there's always a timing thing. You know, Blue Cross Blue Shield bills us weekly. So some of those are the claims that we actually know that we just haven't reimbursed for yet, and then there's the IBNR piece of that. Admin fees payable, that's just a very, very small adjustment. It's actually a credit due back from Blue Cross on that side. Dental, we always pay our admin a month behind. We have some assessments payable, and obviously, so what we do is when we're accruing that IBNR for claims, we know that if there's claims, there's assessments. Mm-hmm. So we accrue those potential assessments as well. So IBNR and assessments follow each other. And then, I'm sorry, the claims payable was all stuff that, all that last week that was due. The 6.8 million was all that was due on that last week of claims. IBNR claims to be paid, the IBNR runouts right there, it's the 4.2 million. So really we had, you know, about 11 million in claims liabilities. We have the reserve for claims adjustment expense, so that's the reserve for if we had to pay off and let them run out the claims, if we were to close our doors, we'd have to pay Blue Cross to finish. And then a small amount of other liabilities, which I think is some capitation that was payable. So you look at your assets, you look at your liabilities, the difference is net position, and that's what we have. So because you have more cash, you haven't paid it all out yet, so you can't, but it's basically your net worth, your fund balance, net position, all these terms are interchangeable depending on net income. If we're in the profit world, they're all the same. So you can see we started with, on the health program, 39.8. We lost 5.9, so we're at 33.8. Dental, we started with 7.6 million, lost 140,000. We're at 7.4 million. So overall, we have a net position of VEHI of 41.3 million, and it's compared to 47.4 last year. Questions on that? All right. And I won't spend a lot of time on the last one, because I know we need to
Chris,
move.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
I did.
yeah.
The interest receivable line item, what am I missing? That's such a big number.
That's 1 month worth of interest on our cash account. You see where you see
I'm
people,
so sorry, never mind. I missed the decimal point and I added a 0.
oh, yeah, you
I'm
know what,
sorry.
I didn't format that column with, I
That's all
didn't
right.
take my pennies off.
But I
Sorry
noticed,
about that.
I noticed it at every one other row.
Yes,
I'm
yes.
sorry.
You know what is, this is a habit of mine and I apologize.
Chris likes pennies.
I do, everything in my
Nobody
world
else
is pennies.
Right, nobody cares.
I look in pennies and then what I try to do is reformat things back to no pennies when I print them for you. But I have to look at pennies, so sometimes
it.
I forget to reformat those columns.
That
So
would
it's,
be my
it's,
misreading, not
so
your
it's
mistake.
$49,000, yes, in interest receivable, so. Anything else? All right, so on the budget to actual, I won't spend a lot of time unless you have a specific question. I think we kind of just talked about all these categories when I went through the income statement. Basically, it just shows you where the budget, what we said is the budget for last year, how the actual health and dental, a total, and how we ended the year. And you can see we were under budget. We were under budget in general operating expenses by about $158,000, and we were under budget in wellness of $253,000. However, the intent is to carry those funds over for wellness only, not the operating budget funds, just the wellness funds, because there were some IT projects that they had planned and budgeted, and those monies were to be allocated to these projects that are within the works. And they just didn't finish them on time, as often happens, best laid plans. And so they obviously want to finish those projects that they had started. Anything else, or?
And that was all by way of presenting to us the financial circumstances
Yes.
that we face. And we will talk about its relationship to the net position policy soon,
Yeah,
right, as we move ahead.
I'm gonna take you into rates.
Okay, Chris, thank you.
Chris will stay for the rates too.
Oh, yes, I'm thankful.
Thank you so much, especially for your patience. Although I have to point out, I don't have to, but that the delay at least enabled you to give us all the information through the last fiscal year's entirety.
True.
So the rate setting team, we'll start with the health rates, is Mark and Bobby Joe and Chris and I. And I'm your point person. Mark, Chris, and Bobby Joe will point in if I misspeak, which I sometimes do, get my fiscal years muddled up, or if I miss something. And in your packet, we gave you in early August a document that was an overview of how the rates are set. We're not gonna read that now. I hopefully will actually be following this in the discussion. The next document is our net position policy, so you may want that in front of you. This is a brand new policy. You adopted it just a few months ago. And we asked for it to be adopted to help us in this rate filing. DFR asked us a few questions about the policy, made no other comment, so they don't get to approve it, but they certainly get to question it, and they will use this to help evaluate the rates that get filed. Chris talked about net position, and I'm gonna give you another look at net position in a minute with a color-coded spreadsheet after I talk to you so that you don't look at the numbers without context. But the net position, which we can use the term reserves as a synonym, which is sort of how we more think of it in lay terms. It's the money that we have set aside in case we need it. So what's the in case we need it for? And that in your policy under number 1, well, we pay claims that we didn't expect, okay? Because there will always be claims that we didn't expect. Although sometimes there are actually less claims than we expect, but there will always be something unexpected. We'll also pay any unexpected non-claims, and we actually had this a few years ago where the state and federal fees started escalating rather quickly. The federal had a fee that I think it was $2 million the first year and it was $4 million by the second year, and we had actually already set rates before the fee was known, and so that's an unexpected that you have to use your reserves until you can build it in, right? Then there's that margin above the IBNR, that's what Chris just talked about. If the year before us ends negative, right? We end up paying more, like Chris said, in FY18, we ended up not needing to pay as much and got some money back. But right now, FY19 looks like we might lose. So if we lose, where's that coming from? It's coming from our reserves. So we have the money to cover that. We also may want to change our individual stop loss. Stop loss is another word for reinsurance. So right now, if one person, as Chris said, has more than $750,000 in claims, Blue Cross pays those claims. They hold our stop loss or reinsurance. But we may decide that we want to raise that to $800,000 or $850,000. Because remember, if you keep it at $750,000 for a decade or 15 years, you're holding less and less risk, right? So your premium to cover that's going up and up, and at what point do you want to do that? We also can use it to smooth rates. We did that a couple of years ago when we had a 16.8% rate increase for the health program, and we bought it down to a 10.2. We used our reserves. We might want to invest in something like Remedy. The first year that we hired Remedy, we hadn't built it into our rates, but we knew we had reserves to cover it. We knew it was the right kind of investment. We also might want to do additional benefits or services for members. In fact, in the dental program, we're going to ask you to consider using the dental program's net position to do just that. So there's a lot of different ways you can use net position. As we get into the rates, I am going to pass out some documents. All the documents that I pass out, you need to get back to us. Most of them are drafts. They won't be final until they get filed with DFR. And we don't circulate them while they're in the draft phase, other than for your information here. You know, you really don't set the rates as the board, because the rates are set by an actuary. The whole point of the rates is actually to bring in enough money that year to cover all your expenses that year. It's the money in equals money out. That's your goal. Now, you'll never get it quite right. If you don't get it right and you take more money than you need, your reserves will go up. If you take in less money than you need, your reserves will go down, right? But it's a mathematical calculation. It's just like life insurance. You know, how old you are, how healthy you are, they have some table of what your life insurance premium needs to be, and it doesn't really matter how you personally are going to behave. There's a calculation for what's needed. So it's a mathematical calculation. And in fact, DFR checks the actuaries on that. That's one great thing about having a regulator. And the DFR has never changed the actuary's assumptions. Sometimes they find a little technical, they need clarifications of questions, or they miss something by a point in amount calculation, which is why it's great to have a second team of actuaries, but Blue Cross provides that to us. So what you can do is you can look at your net position policy, and you can decide whether or not you want to modify those rates, because those are the rates that we need. And you can modify them for lots of different reasons, but basically you can lower them or raise them depending on your net position, right? Those two things go in concert.
Or use thereof.
Or use thereof. But when you file that modification to DFR, at the end of the day, they don't have to accept it, okay? They can say yes, they can say no, they can have a conversation, they can tell you exactly what to do, they can send it back and ask you to refile an amendment. They have a lot of latitude about that, and they will look at this policy in doing so. So the key pieces of the policy is on the bottom of page 1. We have a target of 15% of expenses. So if you look at how much money we spend in a year, and this is just the health program now, we want to take 15% of what we expect to need and hold that off in reserve. That's our target. We had an actuary help us determine that. He relooks at it periodically. Now, we don't want to have to try to hit that exactly and sort of chase a percent where we have, as Chris said, you can go $4 or $5 million either way in a year very easily in a program of this size. So what we did in our policy, if you look at the next page, is we basically said that between 15 and 9 is our discretion. But if we hit a 9%, that's a trigger to take action. That means that we can't watch We have to actually have a plan. We need to, management come to the board. Why are we at 9%? How did we get here? You're not gonna ever plan to be at the bottom of that range, right? But it gives you time to respond before you get into a situation where you could be in trouble. Being in trouble means that we might be required in the middle of the year to raise rates. Okay? Which we've never had to do and we never want to do. Now, if we actually drop below 6%, we have to inform DFR of the plan as well. Although I will tell you, DFR watches us monthly in this and tracks us all the time. So it's not like they're not gonna know what's going on until you get to 6. But at 6%, DFR has to have a copy of our plan and will be more actively engaged as regulators. So that's sort of the landscape that we get to operate in. The other thing that when we look at rates, and this is where I'll pass out these nice colorful sheets, and there's enough here for our guests as well. Tracy, can you pass that one? And this actually is the simple version of the form that Chris builds for us that I have learned how to read. I won't speak for Mark above Joe. But usually we have more columns and more rows.
Yeah, there's usually more.
We've
There's a
tried-
reason why there's fewer.
Mark has lobbied us. So when we look at net position and we look at rates, we actually look across 4 fiscal years at a time. So we have to look at 18, 19, 20, and 21 before we can set FY21 rates. We also look at, so you'll see that 18 is in green, it's audited and it's closed. 19, I've given you 3 views, right? The first view is 2 years ago, when we set those rates for FY19, what was the picture then? Then the second purple view of FY19 is a year ago, when we just started, what did we think then? Now you're seeing the unaudited, although as Chris said, it has really been audited at this point. I can't put that on paper, but these numbers are final. How the year actually ended, that's the 5.9 at the bottom in red that we lost at the end of the day, as Chris said. And that gives us the net position of 33.8 million, right? But remember, it's not really done, right? We might lose more, but when we do, it'll go into FY20 because we won't change these numbers right here. So if you look at FY19, let's just look at that change in net position line. It's the one that had some red. When we first set the rates, we thought we'd lose 8.6 million. That was a planned use of our reserves. That was the year that we bought down the 16.8% rate increase to a 10.2. A year ago, we actually improved that because Blue Cross the state bought too many vaccinations or something. The immunizations, the shots that you get, and so they ended up selling them to Blue Cross for a penny each, some ridiculous thing like that. That instead of paying the normal whatever you would pay for these vaccinations, we got them at almost free. So that's why we saw that would normally be, $1 million something that we would have spent in that category that we didn't have to spend, a one-time deal. So we thought, gee, we'd end up better. We actually ended slightly better at 5.9, except for really, as Chris said, we lost 9.4. Okay, because the two things that helped us, the investments and the prior year, we weren't counting on. So if you really want to look at our thinking, we went from 1 to up to down. Okay, so that's how we look. So now let's look at FY20 for 2 years. That's the year we just barely started. We're a couple months in. When we set them last year, we wanted to break even. We tried to set our rates so that they would be exactly what we needed, as close as we could get. A year later, we now think we're going to lose $4.1 million. I'll tell you why in a minute. Plus, we actually, according to Chris, think we might lose another $1 million more than that because we're going to bring in the FY19 into there. Now, if we have to decide what our investments earnings are on a day like Friday last week, we're going to lose in investments too, right? So those are the variables that we're dealing with. And as we know, we still don't have FY20 exactly right. So what's kind of happening in FY '20 that makes us go down the 4.1 million that we didn't think of a year ago? Well, part of the story is going back to FY '19 and looking at member contributions. That's our only income really, that's the premium. And you see that we collected 240 million in premium instead of the 241 that we anticipated, that originally was 243 that we anticipated. So we're collecting less money. Well, why? Do we have less people? Well, not really. There's two different changes that have happened. One is in the retiree system, we've had more people moving from under age 65, aging into age 65 in the Vistor system. Well, once you age into 65, your premium drops because you're in Medicare primary. So we counted on more premium from younger people in that retiree bucket that ended up aging, we had more people age than come in to replace
You were
them.
gonna
So,
say aging faster, weren't you?
so we had more people moving out into Medicare than we did coming into that early retiree bucket. So it's a change in type of people. And in the active plans, we had more people moving from the higher premium plans, Platinum and Gold, into the Gold CDHP. So we still have the people, but they're paying less in premium. Then you look at, in FY '19, those 219 columns, we actually paid, instead of 224 million in claims, 225 million in claims. So often what happens is when you get less premium, you also get less in claims, but we got less in premium and more in claims. So why are we getting more in claims? Because we are still in FY '21, working through new health plans. And we're not done yet. We hoped we were done a year ago. This shows us that we're not, and you're gonna see it again in the FY '21 rates that we're gonna recommend to you. Why aren't we done? Well, because it is a generational shift to move from plans that have basically been around for a generation into an entire new series of health plans. And the actuaries are making predictions on, we had lower premiums for two reasons when we went into these new health plans. And the actuaries are making assumptions, and they've only, I'll tell you what the two drivers were in a minute, but the actuary have been making assumptions until this year without us ever having paid a claim under those new health plans. This is the first year that the actuaries have had, because last year when they pulled claims in in the spring of 2018, we had only a couple months and they basically didn't take them into account because it was too new. And so we have 1 year of actual claims, and everybody knows, even with everything going rosy, the first year of new plans aren't typical, right? It isn't. It takes time. Blue Cross calls it the rush, the crush, the hush. I don't know if they have different names that rhyme with hush that describe it. So what are the two reasons that we put lower premiums with the new plans? Well, one is there are higher out-of-pocket cost potential, so there is more money that the members pay before VEHI pays. Most people are in the Gold CDHP plan, and in the single plan, they have an $1,800 deductible before we start paying anything. Whereas in the VHP, we pay $1 for emergency care, $1 for hospital care, $1 for outpatient labs, different things. So it's a different structure. So that allows VEHI to have lower premiums. The other reason that we had lower premiums was the expectation that people's behavior would change. So in ways like going to the urgent care instead of the emergency room, getting generic instead of brand, not taking all 12 PT visits that you were authorized for, and rethinking after 6 visits, have I gotten as good as I need? Do I really need the other visits? Different kinds of behaviors. Now the thing with behavior change is it can go the other way. It can also go in not getting any PT visits, right? And there's no way for actuaries to know whether people are choosing high value care over low value care, or whether or not they're not getting the care that they need. but they still are able to make some assumptions that we will spend less overall, because generics are very less expensive than brands. Urgent room care visits are very less expensive than ER. Those are the kind of things we're looking for. We are not seeing that happen to the degree that was anticipated. We've now adjusted a couple of times, okay? So now, in FY20, we still, even though the premiums are going up, we still, because we applied a 10.9% rate increase last year, you see that Blue Cross still thinks we're going to get less in premium than they expected a year ago. I'm looking at the orange columns, where the 266 is down to 265, again, because of where people are, not because we're losing members or losing enrollment. We expect claims to go up, and that's actually quite a big jump, because as they start to look at actual claims, they don't think we're going to see those shifts to the degree that they had expected. And then there are some other factors in there, such as we're seeing more increase in pharmacy spend in the medical arena. So not only are we seeing increased pharmacy spend in the retail, but we're seeing increased pharmacy as part of your medical benefit, to the degree that for the first time this year, Blue Cross actually pulled that number out for us when we look at FY21. So what Blue Cross did for us Friday afternoon was look at FY19, how that ended, look at what they can see now in FY21, and put that into FY20 to give us a new snapshot, and that's what we have right there. So in FY21, the rates that we're going to provide to you, that we jointly agreed on, after all four of us spending the weekend mulling it over, we met again this morning, is we're going to recommend rates, I'll show you in a minute, that will allow us to have a net position, I'm going to move to the bottom now, that we think is the responsible way to end the year. So I'm going to move into that bottom two lines. You can see our net position, we were at 39 million, just under 40 million a year ago, which was at 14.9%, and our target's 15%, so we're basically spot on. We ended this year with $33.8 million, and we're hitting 13.7%. But remember, part of that is kind of lucky, right? We had a couple things go our way, could have been worse.
These numbers are all a factor of the member contributions, right?
No, it's a factor not of member contributions, because we might not collect enough money. It's a ratio to expenses, which is claims plus all of the other.
Right, so where's the number that gives us the total expenses?
It's not written out there.
All right.
It's in Chris's calculation, but it's a ratio, so you can have the same amount of money in your reserves, and as your expenses go up, your percentage goes down, okay? So we're looking next year, a year from now, at being here with our net position at 12.4%. And again, we have sort of between 9 and 15 is our area to work in. That's pretty much the center of that, and we feel that's reasonable. But we don't feel we can drop from that.
Actually, we'd be at 11.
Well, that was a year ago. Now we're looking at that dropping to 11. Now we're getting closer to that 9. We think we need to get back to the 12%. Now that 12%, which is the rates that we're going to show you of net position, we believe allows us to absorb the unknowns. Okay? Because even though we're building in sort of the normal, we've taken nothing here to address the statewide bargaining, nothing in here to address the opportunity to have one TPA administer all these HRAs and HSAs that gets built into our premium as for a benefit of members, because if you have a statewide system, there might be an opportunity for some efficiency there. Both of those things would be a 6-month, impact us for 6 months. We also know that there's gonna be some legislative discussion that may impact visitors around preventive benefits in FY '21. And frankly, we still don't know at this point whether we've still got it right as far as what our premiums are. So we feel like we've gotta end at 12% in order for us to be responsible and send DFR rates that they're gonna be confident that we are in a good position to absorb the unknowns and still stay above our 9%.
So the rate recommendation we're about to see assumes this number?
Yes.
Okay.
So now we're gonna take rates, and we're gonna take actives first and then visitors. All right, gotta find my papers. So this
Quick
is,
question,
yeah,
is this going back to you?
yes, that's going back to me.
Oh, my notes on it.
You know what, you can photocopy your notes before you leave.
All right, thank you.
We're gonna have to accompany you
Just your
now.
notes.
Just your notes, Bobby Joe, will you
Turns
will you
out, my
photocopy?
notes made no sense,
Just forget. That page.
even to me.
And actually, Joel, just so you know, I mean, I don't put a total of expenses on here, but it's here. Because it's your claims, it's your assessment, it's your VEHI admin and wellness costs.
You just add those
So if you
up.
add those three up, it's there, it's there. But-
You know
But
what,
we're trying to
Mark asked us to
get
remove
rid of-
every unessential line.
Okay.
That's right.
It wasn't there anyways. That
You
wasn't
wouldn't let
there.
me add more
Come on, they
lines.
gotta leave the room.
We didn't wanna just have expenses, we thought it was important for you to
Okay,
see
it's
expenses
okay,
broken
folks.
No, I just
out.
wanted to tell you how I got there.
Let's move on.
So, it's a
Even that's your
stapled,
fault.
it's a stapled sheet, we have enough for guests, but they have to come back as well, guests. It's three
Oh, okay.
pieces of
So
paper,
don't
they're
worry, don't
stapled.
we only get them one at a time, or can we look at
They're gonna come back.
We have a, something we're gonna swipe you with. You don't understand that these have been embedded with metallic things so that
Yeah.
when you leave there, you know.
Anybody with the foresight or mistaken judgment to look ahead will know that we're either gonna be here till 9:45 or we're gonna have to slash some items on this agenda. I've got a proposal ultimately
So,
to do just that.
So, the bottom line is that we need a 12.9% rate increase. And you'll see that on the bottom right corner of the first page. The gold CDHP gets the 12.9, the other three plans are actually modestly higher than that. But overall, we needed 12.9. If you go to the third page of the packet, well, go to the second page, I guess. The second page is 10.9. That's what we need in order to cover the costs for the year. The other 2% is order to bring our reserves back up to where we need to be. Okay? So
One more time, the 10.9 is the balance.
the 10.9 is the balance, but we don't think balancing is the prudent thing to do.
that leaves us
That's
at
your
11%.
discussion, even though it's a joint recommendation, it's your decision as a board,
I'm sorry.
up to DFR who will finally get to decide.
So where do we find the amount of money that accounts for that distinction, up from 10 point, whatever it goes to 12?
It would be
That
the-
4.8 million, that's how much, so if you go back to your color-coded sheet, we expect FY '21 with 4.8 million to add to our reserves.
So we,
Just above the blue line, that's the 2%.
so each percent.
Otherwise, it would be a break-even year.
So each percent of premium is a little less than 2.5 million.
Yes, and you might say, why isn't a percent of premium 2.9 million? Because we collect 290 million, because we're only looking at actives, we're not looking at visitors. Visitors is in the 290 million line, but they are not getting
The same rate.
the same rates.
Okay.
We're gonna look at them in a minute. Okay, so you're looking just at the active population, not the retirees, but the retirees are built into all of those numbers. Except for we're only asking for money from the actives to add to the reserves because it was the actives that got your money to lower their rates a couple years ago, and it's the actives that are driving these numbers. So now the last page is how do we get to 10.9? And Blue Cross has done this for us now 3 years. So the 4.4% is the amount that needs to increase because we aren't seeing the savings that we expected. That's 100% related to our transition to new plans. 5.6, which is the difference between 10 and 4.4, is the normal things that drive rate increases, I'll talk about very briefly. And the extra 0.9 is because Blue Cross is making their assumptions based on the current payments that go to hospitals and doctors. But the hospitals are in front of the Green Mountain Care Board right now asking for rate increases. For the year FY20, they'll ask for another rate increase for the year FY21 that these are going to cover. So in order to give us an additional amount of money for the fact that the hospital budgets will go up, even though we don't know by how much, that's equal to 0.9. So the other things that I wanted to sort of give you as some perspective is that in FY19, our trend was actually 6.8, even though our rate was a 10.2, which needed to be a 16.8, but we brought it down. And in FY20, the year we're in now, our trend that drove our rates last year was a 5.5%, and 5.4 was due, this is our transition unknowns. And now that transition unknown is 4.4, so we're getting closer. And our actual trend is 6.5, and I put 6.5 as the 5.6 difference between 10 and 4.4 plus the hospital budgets.
Well, I thought you were just dyslexic.
So this is driven, okay, by the cost of medical and pharmacy. And as the cost goes up, right, we have to collect more money. The biggest driver in pharmacy is specialty drugs in retail, but we're now seeing an increase in some, what I think you call specialty drugs in the medical arena. They're in the medical arena because you're getting them in the doctor's or hospital's office, so it's coming through your medical claims instead of your pharmacy claims. It's also utilization. Now, utilization means the number of MRIs or emergency room visits or prescriptions being filled. We actually have, I think it's a 1.9%, and Mark will help us at another meeting dive into this more because he's the, he can hold numbers in his head when it comes to these kind of things that I can't hold. We have about a 1.9% trend on the medical side. 1% of that's the medical pharmacy actually.
And just to be clear, that's not just diverting stuff from the pharmacy to the medical
Right.
office. It's stuff they have to have done there, like infusion therapy and things like that, right?
So our utilization is actually pretty flat, but it's been flat for a generation because frankly, we sort of saturated the utilization. People get all of the services that they need. People aren't not getting services in our plans as a rule. So there's not a spike in utilization that we tend to see. And then it's also what's called mix, and this is where we haven't seen as much change as we hope. Mix is more generics, less brand names, more urgent care visits replacing emergency room visits, more x-rays replacing more expensive MRIs, or x-rays foregone, or changes in how the sort of mix of services. So all those things is what goes into here. The other thing that goes into that is something that's called, I won't use my word, benefit leveraging. I'll use Blue Cross's words. That goes in every year, and that means that when we set our plan designs in 2016. So I'll just use what's the cost of tier 1 generics in the platinum plan? Do you remember?
What's the cost of
tier one generics, what's the copay for that?
$4.
$4. So we set $4 for that generic tier one copay in the platinum and gold plans in 2016. It's still $4 in 2021. So we, VEHI, pay the rest of it. So it could have been a $6 claim and we paid $2. Now it could be an $8 claim and they still pay $4 and we pay $4. Then it could become a $10 drug, they still pay $4, we're paying $6. That's called benefit leveraging. If you don't adjust it for inflation and make it, now you're not gonna adjust it every year or make it $4.25. It's like school lunches, right? You don't adjust it every year, you drive everybody crazy. But eventually, if you don't adjust your out-of-pocket costs with inflation, that's acceptable, but it increases your premiums. It's called benefit leveraging. And our plans have become, again, just as a sort of benchmark, when we set the plans here we go, when we, there's no notes, here we go. When we set the gold CDHP plan, it was an 81% actuarial value plan. It's now an 83.4% actuarial value plan without us doing anything different, just because of time. The other thing to realize is that it's actually a 97.7% actuarial value plan as an entire group because of the HRA HSA funding that we collect as of FY19, which is part of why you're not seeing the changes over here in mix and utilization. Cost is totally outside. This is totally
That's
something.
inflation.
Yeah, this is just inflation.
And
Now,
does that lead into the 4.4? Is that why we're not a part of not
so
seeing the
these
expected
are all because we aren't seeing behavior changes that we expected. Because I think the first year, you know, it was very new for all of us, and I think that we, you know, we should have got closer, but we didn't for a variety of factors, including Blue Cross didn't, they had some assumptions we weren't aware of. We had some assumptions they weren't aware of. I think we've cleared that up, and I think we're getting closer. We hoped this was gonna be 0, frankly, and it's not. We hope that the next year will be 0. We shall see.
May I say, it's also very hard to quantify what we mean by behavior change
Yeah.
in this context. We have to be really careful how we talk about this. And the Blues did inform us, we did see a reduction in claims over the last year, just not what they had projected
Correct.
to see.
Right.
In fact, that's reflected in Chris's numbers too, I believe.
And the other thing for us to think about, I mean, remember, VEHI is gonna see less in claims because more of these claims are being paid for out of HRA, HSA, FSA dollars, right? So we're always gonna see less claims than we saw in a different benefit design. So that factors in. We still have lower premiums. I picked the, if you look at the VHP single plan, because people get caught up in percents and forget that we still have lower premiums, right? If we take what that was and apply this trend to it, it would be basically $903 a month. And the gold CDHP, which is where just about everybody is, single plan, even after that rate, is going to be $7.26 and 60 cents. That's on your thing. So there's still a significant difference.
The cent.
I know, well, I have a sense here too, but I'm trying to help you out, but you've got that there. So those are the drivers, and we're not sitting here,
But that's premium expense only, right?
that's just premium, 1 month,
Correct.
single. It doesn't mean that there's savings because that money could have been sent other places.
HRA, HSA, FSA.
We are not
Salary.
watching this as observers, Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I. So how can we influence this? Well, Remedy is one of the ways we're trying to influence this with pharmacy, right? And even though Blue Cross does the negotiating, the ACO model, the Accountable Care Organization model in the state, is in flux that's going to influence this area. And we're actually tomorrow meeting with Blue Cross on that issue, I think. soon,
Yes.
we're meeting with Blue Cross to think about how we understand the ACO and how we can leverage the work that they're doing, the Accountable Care Organization in the state, to help with that. We also are becoming more engaged in Blue Cross's work in this area to see where we can influence it. As opposed to a couple years ago where Blue Cross just did it and we said thank you, we are being active in this area. We're being active in these areas in thinking about what is high-value care, what is low-value care, how do we incentivize people, how do we educate people? And those people are providers as well as consumers, right? It's both. And this is what we call, and I don't know if you remember March, because it was a long time ago, this is what we call our cost and quality initiative, that you really haven't heard from us as a management team of any length since last March. This is the work that we're doing. And what we're trying to do is see what, there's probably a million things that could be done in here. What's our role? How can we be most effective? What can happen quickly? What takes more time? How do we work in that area? So that we aren't just sitting there watching, we are actively working, but for FY21, this is the situation that we're in. So before I stop for a second, and we talk about Visters, we do have a motion, it's back here. We do have 4 motions for you to consider related to the health rates. One for the actives, one for Visters, we should actually talk about that first. And then one is to authorize Joel to sign these rate sheets. When they get final, they'll actually require a signature for DFR. And the other is to authorize me to file and go ahead and do this submission. But before we go to Visters, questions, Mark and Bobby Joe, what else did I miss?
Can you tell me what the motion for the rate is going to be, just so I can have closure in the concept?
Yeah, so I can pass these out, just realize that,
Only read the first one.
well, you can read them all.
I just need to
Gotta
package
keep one
that
for me.
Yep, and file it. in
So
my
the,
brain.
the way that we file rates is not to put in an exact number yet, because it's possible the 12.9 could become a 12.8 or something else. We've had a point happen here or there in these last few weeks. We're gonna file Friday, September 13th. That's when Blue Cross can get it ready. So it could be tweaked, so we don't put in a number that could become obsolete. We have you file the rates that are necessary as determined about Blue Cross to pay for your expected claims and expenses for each health plan, so they each get a different rate, right, that they need, including the 9% for the hospital budgets. 0.9%, thank you, plus an additional 2% with the goal of rebuilding, it's only a goal, towards the target. So that's what we are gonna ask you, that's what we need from you. Now, you don't have to do our recommendation. You could file as low as a 10 and not add anything for hospital budgets and not add anything for the reserves. That's your discretion.
And if I understand this right, the operating assumption, which could change, is 12.9 is the total.
That is our joint recommendation, that you adopt a budget that will lead to a 12.9
So
total.
we are assuming a 10% flat.
10% is flat according to the
Right,
actuaries.
right,
Yep, and unless there's a calculation change we find, or something modest changes, sometimes we've had some little assessment or something change that,
You can count on that 0.9 being pretty solid too on the hospital budget.
Yeah.
They just don't put the 0.9 in for,
right, because the hospital budgets aren't adopted, they can't put it in there, and Blue Cross can't put it in their analysis, which leads to a 10.0. We have to put it in our
so
analysis.
technically the base is 10.9, but again, it's not reflected in the pro forma rates.
Well, what you're saying is the 0.9 increase in hospital budgets, as far as we are concerned, is a done deal.
I think we're operating under the assumption that the 0.9 is absolutely something we have to factor in. Right. And when we first started talking about this, it was less than 0.9, and now it's gone up. And of course, everyone's watching what's happening in Springfield and across the state, so we're anticipating that 0.9
And
is a
if-
solid figure.
We didn't, it's likely DFR
Well, I was about to
might
say, one way or the other, we're gonna pay the piper on the hospital budget.
Come on, guys.
Right, we're gonna pay for it one way or another.
I'm struggling with sequencing here because you received from me a motion that dovetails with this. It doesn't change it, but adds to it. And so we all know that we're talking about, give or take, a small amount, a 12.9% rate increase on top of whatever the premium structure is.
No, that's the,
So, no,
that would be the,
so this last year was a 10 point, and this year,
What I meant was 12.9% on top of,
that gets you to that.
the
That gets you,
12.9.
the 12.9 is in that
Yeah.
number.
okay,
You can
Thank
see
you.
that, you can
Yeah.
see
Didn't
it
get it.
on your
Yes.
rate sheet.
I got it.
Yeah.
I didn't see it.
So,
Yeah.
we had, 2 years ago, we had a 10.2, even though the field knew it should have been a 16.8, we brought it down. Last year, we had a 10.9, this year, we're looking at a 12.9.
And therein lies my angst. And fortunately, this one doesn't have anything whatsoever to do with who appointed me. It's got everything to do with VEHI and the perception of the people we represent, which extends from subscribers and employees to taxpayers. And we all know, who have been around this, well, from whatever perspective, everybody in this room has been around for at least 20 years, with perhaps one exception. These continued rate increases are at best upsetting to everybody associated with us. I'm not at all suggesting there's anything wrong whatsoever with the arithmetic. I am suggesting that it would be in VEHI's interest, particularly as it relates to how our constituencies think of us, if we joined with a rate recommendation adoption, components of our work, that most of which are already in place, to show our people that what we are about is more than simply the arithmetic associated with determining how much the cost of health benefits should be.
I'd like to ask that we finish the rate setting discussion.
Well, I thought we had
Before-
finished the rates.
We have
No,
Visitors.
no, we need to talk about
Visitors.
visitors and dental.
Well, dental is a separate component of the agenda.
Well, that's
So
an important
visitors-
component.
I didn't say it wasn't important, it's a separate component.
Wanna
The
do
visitors
visitors?
is good.
Yeah, let's do this.
Two visitors, I apologize again.
So Visitors is a different beast, and Visitors is the Vermont State Teachers Retirement System. It's run by the state, actually the state treasurer's office. It has their own board of trustees. And it has about 875 people who are retirees but under age 65 and not yet on Medicare. So they are, you know, have one of our active plans. Well, actually, they don't. They used to have one of our active plans, the VHP, the JY, the 300 comp. Now they have the old, they still kept those plans, they didn't move to our actives. And they have about 7,000 people who are Medicare eligible, but they have a wraparound plan provided by us that supports their Medicare coverage. So the dynamic between them, and we've actually known this for a while, back when Joe Zimmerman was still here. We used to not be able to see those under 65s because they were in the VHP, they were in the JY, they were in the 300 comp with all of those 42,000, with 34,000 active employees and dependents. And we never looked at them by themselves. So what we had been seeing for a few years was that the Medicare primary people could use a rate decrease even while our other plans needed an increase. So there were a couple of years we held them level while everybody else got an increase. I think there's one year we even decreased the Medicare primary while everybody else got an increase. But in this move to our new health plans where they are not on the same health plans, right? We now see a dynamic, we uncovered it a couple of years ago, that DFR is very concerned about. There is quite a dramatic variation of where their plans need to be in order to be accurately priced. So if you go to page 2 on Visters, you'll see it. Most dramatically, should have stapled these in the other way. But if you go to the second page on Visters and you scan the right column, you'll see a huge variation among these plans on where they need to go. Up 20, down 43, right? All over the place. So DFR has given us a mandate, they gave us a mandate a couple years ago, which is, as a rule, VEHI has to give each plan the rate it deserves, and they can't give one more and another less to help them out. Except for they've made an exception for Visters because of this dramatic difference. You're not gonna take this in one bite. Instead, they've said, we have to make progress over time to get this so that you don't have this subsidization between the plans. So if you look at Visters overall, they have a 4% decrease, right, at the bottom right corner. Why are they getting a decrease? Why is it so different from the actives? Well, there's two reasons. There's less expensive people. Remember I told you there's less people in that under 65 where we own most of their claims. Because less people have come in to fill that, and they've aged into the Medicare primary. The other reason is that in FY17, they had a sharp spike in specialty drug usage that was sharper than the actives or the Blue Cross's book of business. And Blue Cross thought they were going to have a trend and built in to accommodate that trend. It turned out that FY17 was a blip, because when you look at FY18 and FY19, they still have high specialty costs, but they're in line with everybody else. They don't stand out as unique. So you can drop their rates because they have less expensive people and because the pharmacy trend was a blip. So this is sort of a one-time drop for them. So their rate is a -4.0. Now if you go to the front page, their Board of Trustees met on August 13th. You can see that date at the top. And actually we're still talking to Visters. Their trustees may meet again because they still have some time, because what they do has no impact on our reserves or our actives. It's addressing their own internal issue. But on the 13th, and this may be their final decision, they have asked that you file rates that hold the under 65s at 0 and the Medicare primary get a -5. And when you put that together because of numbers and weight it makes the -4. So
Basic, obvious question. Do we have any real reason to vary from that, in your opinion?
there's only one reason to vary from it.
Mark's opinion?
Well, it's a joint, because even though I'm talking,
Your
we spent a
collective
lot of
opinion.
time together on
Okay.
this. So we have a directive to try to close that gap.
Right.
DFR may come back and say, we don't think you've made enough progress on closing that gap. And they might,
Even if we adopt.
even if you send it, they might say, you haven't made enough progress in closing that
And our
gap.
response is, but we did exactly what we were asked to do by Visters.
It doesn't matter.
But they are
I
not
understand.
self-insured,
Okay.
we set the rates.
Got it.
So we have the ultimate responsibility with DFR.
Okay.
So if we feel that what they are doing would lead DFR to think that we aren't being responsible to the mandate that's to us, which is to close the gap,
So what you've done
there's
is,
some
so
tension.
you presented Visters' recommendation,
We
not your recommendation.
we are recommending
Okay,
that you use the language in this motion, that you file the rates as recommended by the Visters Board of Trustees,
pretty much right. Okay.
knowing that right now, it looks like this. But it
Could
may
Might change.
change.
So we are,
This language gives us
so
the
basically,
flexibility.
we're hitching our wagon, as it were, to the Visters Board's
Right.
decision. Okay.
And the only reason not to do that is if they want to use our reserves,
Okay.
or if we think that they are not addressing the directive by DFR, and we think that we need to intercede. But at this time, that is not where we are. We're recommending to you that you pass it through, knowing, however, this is their 813 thinking, they may actually
Okay.
modify
And
it.
just for the sake of, not that I anticipate you're doing this, but we could always change our mind. We could always reverse field on a decision like this before we report it.
Not unless you call a special meeting.
That's why she needs.
We
the
file
motion.
September 13th, you don't meet again until September 24th.
I don't know why I can't keep September 13th in mind, I thought it was the 8th. All right, done. Okay,
So, and then the other two, again, is the authority for the board chair and myself to take action on this. So now, that's our
So can I
presentation.
move 1, 2, 3, 4?
Well, I appreciate you waiting, since I was in the middle of my presentation. This board has the opportunity to convey to our folks that we're paying more attention to them than simply the arithmetic associated with rates and all the factors that go into it. And so I put this thing together with the sole intention of doing just that, conveying to the people we represent that while we are, in effect, without saying it in so many words in this motion, recommending a 12.9% premium rate increase, we're not happy about. And we are doing our level best to mitigate increases every year, but particularly, obviously, in the wake of this motion for future years. Virtually, most of what I'm recommending be included are things that we're already engaged in at one level or another. There may be a time frame issue as far as I'm concerned. I put November 1st for a draft work plan. That might be too ambitious, but it certainly is appropriate for us to ask Bobby, Joe, Mark, and Laura to put together a work plan that doesn't have to have, to draft a work plan. It doesn't mean it has to have all sorts of detail associated with it. That incorporates the very items that they've been recommending to us for the last half year or more. And do some of these other things that we've all talked about, including, at the end, conducting a retreat that actually focuses on the kinds of future directions regarding benefit plans and programs, et cetera, that we should be engaged in around this table anyway. So with that, I'll entertain a motion to I'll make my motion, and we will, I'll make the motion that I sent you all with the understanding that there's really no difference in meaning here, but to make sure that we incorporate in whatever action we take the 4 items that Laura has presented to us under the health rate setting actions. We have to have a lot of discussion about this, but we certainly should have some, and then we'll vote on it.
So can I just ask for clarification, you're ignoring Tracy's motion she made? 'Cause she
I
made a
just
motion.
incorporated it in mine. You'll remember that I began a presentation and she asked that I interrupted, and so I did, not anticipating that there would be an attempt to interpose a motion before I finished my presentation. That's all that happened.
So,
Motion can be made at
Yeah.
some point.
I have a couple of,
Yes, they can, but I yielded my presentation of making the motion so that she could say something, and she did, and then made a motion.
so, may I comment on process?
Yes, but I really would like to get into the discussion about this so that we can act on it expeditiously,
So,
pro or con.
So to be clear, the agenda speaks to acting on the management recommendations for the health rate filings for premium, for our plans and for the Visitors, and in a moment on dental rate filings. And a proposal for a broader position on all of our future work is clearly not on the agenda. While I appreciate the spirit, I've commented before that I feel like extensive motions that are more than motions in our discussions really may not serve us well to build a collaborative and high-performing board that is able to develop consensus. And I feel like the components of the recommendation are items that the board has already agreed upon and affirmed work plans and priorities for. And although I'm sure it's not intended this way, it may appear to some that perhaps the board didn't value exploration of these issues, if we need to somehow reaffirm it, I'm not done yet. And lastly, because I'm not comfortable with all of the components, I feel like it doesn't build trust, respect, and confidence and competence at this board if things are presented in a way that force people to vote for or against things that we may value because they aren't fully fleshed out or aren't following proper process or don't allow for full board engagement. I object to this motion being brought up now. I made a motion on the table that aligns with the agenda, and I ask the chair to consider carefully process and the priority work of the board and ways that we can move forward positively to get the essential work done and convey our shared values about taking good care of our subscribers, our members, and the public that we serve.
Is there a second to my motion?
I guess I'm happy to make a second, but is Tracy's motion in play because it was never seconded? So,
Neither motion has been seconded.
okay, so, sorry, my Robert's rules, I'm happy to second Joel's emotion,
You second that emotion?
motion.
Okay.
But,
I will say that all components of what Tracy interposed is incorporated in what I just said.
So what is your motion, Joel, that is different from your piece of paper?
The motion is to approve the premium rate changes for FY 2021 as presented by our staff, colon, and then list.
But you're
four-
not actually acting, I would prefer you don't use approved premium rate changes, that we worked hard to get
Wait,
this
what's the-
exact language.
Rates.
I just point out
You
that the
said-
members of the public that are here don't have this document.
Does anyone on the board need it?
I just gave mine away.
So you're
What's the word?
substituting
Rates?
A,
Approve the rates?
you're
You
not
did
actually
your-
approving rates, you're approving us to file rates that you are modifying in two ways.
Tracy,
This was a
Oh,
careful
sorry.
I didn't say it was carefully drafted, I'm not complaining about that,
Anybody else?
So why don't you replace A
with
with the.
1 through 4.
Yes.
Do so. All right, the motion will read, that VEHI take the following twin actions regarding health insurance premiums, items 1 through 4 to be verbatim what Laura presented to us before, and items, we'll have to renumber this, item 5, A through E, rather than.
No, it's B.
What?
Good. Good. B.
Oh, you wanted A?
You have A and B. You already have A and B.
Let's try it again. Okay, we'll do it that way. That VEHI, that VEHI take the following twin actions regarding health insurance premiums. A, regarding rate filings, colon, 1 through 4, as Laura has presented to us. B, as written to the bottom of the page. Does that work?
As long as we get rid of the word insurance,
I'm sorry, where?
the very top one.
Oh, well, okay, I mean, I
No.
don't really care, I just
We
look at
care,
this.
it's GFR cares. GFR cares. We're not an insurance company, we don't want to be regulated as such, even though we act as such.
I'm sorry, that's fine, I don't, that's a distinction I should probably benefit from a little more about, but that's fine. That VEHI take the following twin actions regarding health premiums. A, regarding rate filings, the 4 items as Laura has presented in 1 through 4. B, as stated to the bottom of the page.
So is that been
Becky, is that,
Hmm?
are you okay with the second of that motion?
yep, let's have the conversation, yep.
So I'm gonna move to strike all of Part B.
A second.
Discussion?
Just wanna say it's not that I'm not in support of,
Tracy, you made your motion, let's,
you just asked for discussion, I'd like to discuss.
but your hand didn't go up, okay.
Okay.
It didn't.
I just want to clarify that
You may.
in no way, shape, or form does my motion mean that I am not in support of continued work around cost and quality. I think that's work that the board should engage in at a retreat and look forward to scheduling retreat-like activities, given it's going to be difficult to schedule a full board retreat at an upcoming meeting. And I appreciate it, or think it would be helpful for the board to acknowledge the work that we've already done to address all of these things, or many of these things, in the plans and timelines we've already articulated. I think that will convey trust in the commitment that we've made to our mission and goals as an organization.
No, it's not, I think we're discussing a matter of presentation more than anything else. The presentation is
Right.
important when we represent 42,000 people. Without joining together at one and the same place, what we're offering up as yet another double-digit rate increase, without joining that in the same place where people can see it, with several of the basic activities that we're trying to engage in to prevent rate increases of this dimension, we're missing an opportunity to convey exactly what you just said to the people we represent. Fran and John?
Question, Mark?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi.
Hi.
It's not a question.
When we spoke, I don't know, months ago, about the Michigan, Wisconsin thing,
Correct.
did we give the go-ahead on that, or no? It was nixed, right?
That's an issue that's on the management update on the agenda.
Right,
Yeah, well,
okay.
It's not yet come up for an action by the board.
I'm sorry?
It's not yet come up for action by this board.
It's on the agenda.
What we've done is we've continued to explore it, but we haven't taken a vote to proceed with it.
The
Okay.
motion was
Can I-
withdrawn to act on that.
And we had a commitment, based on our consultation with Mark and Laura on agenda, for that to be on the next agenda.
As an action item in September.
And that's why it's included in this motion.
And that's why I think it's not necessary and undermines the process.
Well, here's my concern, and to be honest, I think the idea that we're gonna, I appreciate all the math, that's wonderful. Going up, 12% raise, the fact that the hospitals are going before the Green Mountain Board right now to get a hike. I've been on this board now for almost a year, and I have not seen us do anything. We've talked a lot about procedures, we've talked that we should have a retreat, we haven't had a retreat. We haven't done a bloody thing about doing anything that would help reduce the costs of healthcare. And if it just keeps going up like this, I'm just have to say no, I will not allow for the rates to go up again, because I don't see what anybody's doing. And if we need to break this into two separate things, or we don't, I don't care. Because as far as I'm concerned, so far I have not seen this board really do anything other than keep pushing things down the road, and not actually taking serious focus on how do we get those healthcare costs down. And this is certainly, this is not bringing anything down. I find it very disconcerting and.
John?
I don't like the rate increases, I don't like the rates, obviously. But I guess one question I have is, are these increases out of line with increases that are going on around us?
No.
Are these rates out of line with rates that are going on around us?
I made that point last week and was sort of challenged by its relevance, but they're
So-
obviously in line.
So-
The question is that a good thing or not?
Our
Well-
rates are super competitive and they're better than
That's what I mean.
what
Vermont
he
Health
just said.
Connect.
John, did you mean rate increases or rates overall? Both?
I mean,
Are we,
Yes.
Premiums
is
are,
12.9%?
premiums are still dramatically lower.
What's Blue Cross talking about
I
right
think
now?
the Blues were awarded at 12.4. What was that,
So
maybe
we're,
about a
you know,
10 something?
I mean,
We're slightly higher, but that
And-
doesn't.
and have we, I assume, in a variety of ways, we have communicated the intent to do these things which fall under B, which to me seem like operational things mostly, not necessarily board activities mostly, and that our management team, if that's what it's called, is working on this stuff. And I get, when my premiums go up, it's not enough. And I make a lot more money than most of the people who gotta pay insurance in my district, I'm fully aware of that. So I understand the frustration that it doesn't seem like anything's happening, but to me, that's a world problem, that's not necessarily a VEHI board problem right now, today. I mean, I understand that we have the ability to make a statement, but I guess, how have we communicated that these are things we're doing? Because there's other ways to do it than in a motion.
Wait a minute, I've got a list in my head, and you're next, and Tracy after I go. Where was I think the best answer to your question is to ask anybody in your district, what is VEHI doing to address costs? It's not that we're not doing it, it's that nobody knows it. It's not that we're not communicating about it off and on, but there's no single place to which people can go and say, oh, I didn't know that. The sole purpose of this is basically to fly the colors for VEHI. And to the extent that we're not hiding anything, but to the extent that the activities in which we're actually engaged to address costs are sort of hidden from plain view, I think we're missing an opportunity. I didn't want the rate increase to be double digits, but they are 3 years running, and I know how our people collectively respond to it. I know how school boards respond to it, I know how employees respond to it, and I'm a taxpayer. I know how taxpayers respond to it. First from Laura, then Tracy.
So,
And then let's, I mean, to the extent that there's a lot more to say, so be it, but we've got to cut right through this agenda, much of this remaining agenda, so we've got to get some things actually done.
so Fran, while you've said that you haven't seen work being done, Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I have been doing tremendous work in this area. And the reason that you don't know about it is because we haven't had time on your agenda since March, and even that was abbreviated. So the opportunity to fill you in on our work, I think should should come before.
Precede.
Thank you, I'm tired. Should precede motions where you direct us to do very specific things when you're not even aware of what we are doing, nor are you fully aware of the normal work that we do underneath the projects that we have ongoing, which are significant. I also think that the best way to communicate to members isn't through minutes, but through mission, and through having public discussions about the issues where we unpack them for you. Mark will lead us on that when you are ready. And that even though we've had these rate increases of 10.2, 10.9, and 12.9, we still have plans that are significantly lower in premium than the prior ones. It's still significantly less out of people's pockets than it would have been for premium. And this is how we compare to Vermont Health Connect. 6.8, 5.5, 6.5. Because Vermont Health Connect has their own pressures related to federal rules and the dynamics of that population. All of this, the additional 10.2, 5.4, and 4.4 is the challenge of transitioning to very different model of health plans. After a generation, it takes time to transition. And I hate to tell you, but even if we're done with this, we're about to enter another transition with the statewide bargaining. Don't know what it will look like, don't know where it will point us. But we have another transition coming. And transitions, it's like remodeling your house. It's really ugly for a while and you want to get a divorce. But you enter it because you think it's good reasons. I've lived through it.
Yeah, married. I was just gonna say.
And I'm still married.
The ugly part I understood.
And I'm still married. And you hopefully come out with a product that is what you intended. So we aren't there yet, but, you know, taking into account a motion that directs us when we have been working this, living this, breathing this, and I've put in, this is my third 14-hour day, work day in a row, and I worked on the weekend, to direct us to do things without hearing what we're doing, to me, feels premature. Thank you.
Tracy, Peg.
I just wanted to point out that, to me, this is the beginnings of the work plan, and we have also discussed other things that we wanted to have on an agenda that haven't been on the agenda that aren't included here. So again, for example, employee education and a study of a reflection on the TPA administration process. And I can't support a plan that doesn't include board consideration of all of those things.
I appreciate and understand Laura's motions 1 through 4, and I support those. I feel like the 12.9 is fixed. I understand what the actuary said, and I understand the other costs. I don't like them, I don't think anybody in the room does. But what you explained in the short time you've been up there, Laura, has been immensely helpful. I think that needs to be communicated out through business managers, so that when people hear 12.9% increase,
We
there's
write a
some
narrative, just so
specific,
you know.
it doesn't get to the subscribers as often perhaps as it should.
We send it to business managers, superintendents, school board members, Mark sends it to local union leaders, we do our best, it's on our website.
So from my
And
perspective
everybody
here in
is-
VEHI's image, I think it would behoove all of us as an organization to make those things the priority that we want
I
them
will,
to be.
I will make one comment and then I'll do something else. The one comment I have is there's something Laura said about, essentially what I interpreted is that because we changed plans and lowered the premiums, that there's now somehow more wiggle room for us to work with. And that may not have been the intention, but I just want to suggest that we should in no way ever compare the current structure with the prior structure as a vehicle, even unintentionally, to justify increasing premiums.
The
That
premiums are
means-
increased
that-
because of the actuaries and the numbers.
I'm speaking. I get the sense of the meeting, and I hope you understand that the intention I had here was, in fact, to address in some small way what I know, and what I think some others know, is a difficult reputation that VEHI has among its own people. That being said, I will, with leave of the person who seconded it, withdraw the motion and then.
Do you have an amendment on the table?
Well, the amendment could.
Oh, all right, well, we can act on that. Why don't we, that being said, the amendment's on the table. The amendment is to eliminate Part B. Thank you, that actually simplifies it. All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, not even aye. That leaves on the table, essentially, the provisions in the motion as originally presented by Laura. And, but I guess it's still my motion. And there is a second. Is there not?
Peggy seconded it, yep.
Okay. Is there any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
So you need to give back your sheets, please.
Does that include the motion?
We haven't done the dental yet, so.
You don't have to give us back the motions because they're gonna go in the minutes.
Yeah.
I will tell you, Joel, and I don't know if you've envisioned this, but because you now have a meeting set for September 24th, which was not true when the agenda was created, the dental rates do not have to be acted on until September 24th, but we have to have action then.
Damn, that's probably the shortest item on the agenda.
Actually, I'd like to get its time because but we can do it,
No,
and then you have more time on to interrupt the next meeting.
All right.
Can I say one last thing, if you don't mind?
Yeah.
Very, very quickly.
Marcus, Mark's gonna be out.
Yeah, probably.
Sorry, folks, just very quickly, it's been helpful listening to this conversation around emotions related to the rate changes, and I just want to say, perhaps with caution, that I think the cost and quality work has to take center stage soon. So we need to talk about it very soon, among other things, obviously. But the work that has been started on the cost and quality initiative is deep and complex and important and potentially transformative for us. And we're gonna have to put our best minds to moving it forward. And that probably is gonna begin with us taking you through the opportunity report in some detail, which we've not yet had an opportunity to do. It took an awful long time to get it and conceptualize it, but we definitely have it. And again, it's been helpful listening to all that conversation, but I just want us to keep the cost and quality work front and center as we move forward. Thanks.
I'm thinking out loud here. We don't have 2 hours of meeting time left. With respect to, let's see, the gentle file, we just need that we can do this without skipping a beat next time. So that's item 10. These are in my mind to play with. With respect to item 11, we have to have a discussion. With respect to items 12, 13, and 13, the question is whether we can adopt the budget 14 with some proviso in my mind, and that would enable us to postpone items 12 and 13. And then we'll be close to done. So I guess I will propose that. If people want to handle the dental rate thing now, we can, but my proposal, it's not a motion, my proposal is to postpone action on items 10, 12, and 13, with the understanding that if we act to adopt a budget, it will be provisional regarding what will be the service, what is it, I forget the term in the budget, Chris, for both service agreements, whatever.
It's administrative.
Administrative services by Visbit and Vermont Rail, leaving in place the current amounts. So I guess it would be, the proviso would be something on the order of, but for potential changes in the amounts for those two items.
So you wanna do budget 14 and 15?
I want to do 11
Oh, yeah.
and 14 and 15
Okay.
as quickly as 15 can be done. I tend to agree with Laura, it's probably time to move management updates to the top of the agenda, or near the top of the agenda. Does that work for you? Okay, so I'll be operating with that understanding. 10 will be postponed. We will do 12 and 13 postponed. We will probably adopt the budget, I suspect, as is with that proviso.
You can always amend a budget.
But with, I know that, but it's also easy
Not
not
in
to.
my world, but in this world.
Well, that's
Yeah,
right,
exactly.
that's really true, and it's easy not to adopt a change.
That's because your voters have to approve.
So
it.
Okay,
would
so-
you like a motion to table 10, 12, and 13?
As long as it's coupled with the understanding that the budget, if adopted, will include a proviso for potential
Why don't you
changes.
just pull the budget up first and do
Let's
the
do the
first out
budget.
of order?
Yeah, let's just do that.
Do the budget next and then decide what you're doing.
Because acting on the budget might implicate the Visbit board letter. No, it won't. All right, let's do it. All right, let me verbalize this. I move that action on items 10, 12, and 13 as listed in the agenda be postponed, and that the FY, and that adoption of the FY 20 budget will include a proviso for potential changes in the administrative services by Visbit and Vermont. Is that all right?
But, so you moved to table and to modify the budget, even though you haven't talked about budget yet?
Because if we don't have agreement about the proviso to action, potential action on the budget, then we'll be acting on the budget before we talk about those matters.
Can we state that when we talk about the budget?
That's when it,
But we can avoid talking about those and still act on the budget if we know that we're gonna be returning to them at the next business meeting. Tracy,
Oh.
you actually look like you were agreeing with me, so I would really like it if you
Well-
would say so. On the other hand, what you got?
I don't, no, sorry. The budget can be amended by the board at any time, right? So, and I understand your wish to be sure that there's
Understand
an
that
opportunity.
the
But
size
what
of
I
the
just
vote-
heard you intimate is that we are gonna reach, you anticipate we'll reach resolution on those at the next meeting. I'm comfortable passing the budget, approving the budget with the understanding it can be amended based on the availability of new information. But a contingency that says that we shall amend those is a different thing for me, or shall on a different time. But I'm open to the conceptual change. Just not the level of specificity that the way you framed it offered.
It's gonna take a long time to get to this point. It seems to, I understand your point. It seems to me that rewording this so that action on the budget will itself be provisional pending resolution of the line items that remain outstanding.
That
That
motion
works.
right now to act on the budget, and actually make a motion on item 14.
So the motion would be to adopt, to provisionally adopt, thank you, the FY '20 budget as presented, yes, with the proviso, pending resolution of changes, if any, in the administrative services line items for Visbit and Vermont NDA. Does that do it?
Yeah, yes.
I'm out of here. And I gotta leave on a high
Hey,
note.
I'll second that.
Except for, I'm gonna have to listen to the tape, because I didn't get it.
Okay.
But I can do that.
All right, but we all get it? We're adopting the
Yes.
budget provisionally
Yeah.
and pending therefore the resolution of
If
the other
any,
two
of
items.
any.
Well, if,
Yeah.
you have to resolve it whether there are
We got it.
changes.
Right.
And we have a second, is there any discussion, please, now? All in favor?
Aye.
And we all voted.
Opposed, okay. I also therefore think that.
Now you wanna make a motion to table
Yes, the motion is to table
10, 11.
items 10,
12,
12, and 13.
Is there a
I
second?
second that motion.
Any
Enthusiastically?
Any discussion?
Sounded like it.
And so she seconded that emotion again. You did that before.
I seconded
All
your
in,
motion.
all in favor? Aye?
Aye.
Opposed? All right, we are left with management updates to follow the discussion of the Visbit letter. This could take some time, folks, but I've read the letter, you all have read the letter, I presume. I've written my questions to Bob Giroux about the letter. I've heard nothing in response, and you all have the questions. The singular issue in my mind, and as I've said to Laura in writing on several occasions, there's nothing personal about this. I want to insulate her from the assertions associated with conflict of interest that are written all over that letter from Bob Giroux. And so for that purpose, among others, and there are additional ones, I would entertain a motion that we discuss this in executive session. And the basis of it is that we'll be talking about a contractual matter where premature public knowledge would place this board at a, quote, substantial disadvantage.
I move that we enter executive session to talk about the.
Is there a second?
I thought you moved it.
I
Sorry.
He entertained.
entertained it. I'll second it
moved
if
it?
I have to, but is there a second?
I'll second them.
Could you explain the possibility of premature public knowledge placing the organization at disadvantage?
let's see, I've tried to come up with an analogy, and the only one that's obvious is think about any, well, I don't know, I mean, any contract discussion is where people have not come to terms are typically talked about by the individual parties in isolation, right? For example, Visbit has had some discussions about this. And dating back, I guess, half a year, something like that, months anyway. And this board knew nothing about it. There's a reason for that. I don't know if Visbit engaged in an executive session, but I also know that I saw no reference in Visbit records to anything but authorizing Bob Giroux to work out a draft letter with legal counsel. That's all I know. So I don't know what underlies this letter. I'm really not suspicious by nature. And that's why I wrote Bob the questions that I did, because I wanted to be overt about it all. But I don't know what's going on. And because I don't know what's going on, I suspect none of us knows what's going on. And because none of us knows what's going on, we should exercise caution as a public body and trust it with the benefit lives of 42,000 Vermonters. We ought to tread carefully. And it is legitimate for a public body to enter executive session under these circumstances, and that's why there's no harm, no foul. We can't take any action as a board other than in open session. It just seems to me that for Laura's sake personally, as well as for VEHI's sake organizationally, we are better advised having an initial discussion about this, basically in private, particularly since it is precisely the kind of circumstance the legislature had in mind when it created the exception to the open meetings law. Yes.
I just would like to make a comment, and it really doesn't have to do with your motion about going into executive session. I just want to address my concern of you responding to Bob Giroux's letter
That's
before
fine,
the
but
board.
please, I find that out of order right now. We can discuss that sort of thing in an organized fashion whenever you'd like when it's scheduled. But I understand,
I just wanted to point it out that
I understand.
I felt that
I
you
understand.
were speaking for the board, even though you said you weren't speaking for the board,
Well,
and we hadn't even discussed it.
I understand. And if you read the letter, you'll read several places why I thought it was important to get some preliminary information from the board. Did I see Tracy's hand
Yeah.
and Peg?
I would just say that we regularly discuss contracts in open session. The issues before us are about a contract that's not even up for renewal yet. It's inviting us to talk and clarify the scope of services. And what I believe we will find is a very simple issue, which has to do with the role of president as is defined in law and regulation as pertains to nonprofit and for-profit corporations. And I think if Laura feels like there's a potential conflict of interest, she can recuse and excuse herself if necessary. But I think in the interest of transparency and demonstrating to all of our constituents our thoughtful work to address resolution of these issues, we can have the conversation in open session, and in fact, there's nothing that I expect we'll discuss where premature public knowledge would in any way disadvantage us. That's my comment.
Okay, my only comment to that and to all of us is, unless somebody in this room has information that I don't see how we can be sure of any of that. That's all.
I
It's just, it's
supported
that
the
simple.
motion or made
Not-
the motion because I think it would be safer to go into executive session. We can go into executive session and have the conversation, lay questions out. If there's no reason, then we come out and we
Absolutely.
finish the conversation.
No, you can't.
No.
Executive session doesn't work that way.
You can't continue.
What do you mean?
the conversation.
You don't get to go into executive session, have the conversation, and decide it was okay to have in public after all, and go out. You have to make the determination that it qualifies for executive session.
Premature public knowledge places us at a substantial disadvantage.
And I don't have
And
any
how are
reason,
we to know in the current, or how are we to know? How are we to know that there is not something afoot? You suggested that we already have a contract. This apparently is proposing to amend the contract. That places us in the position of being asked to negotiate an existing contract.
which has always been negotiated in open session, as has been the case for Vermont NEA's contract, which has been discussed repeatedly in open sessions at several meetings of late.
And in which the executive director of Vermont NEA was not asked to
First
leave
of
the
all,
room.
I didn't,
You
may
did not recognize
you may
me,
not
but I
be-
have had
you-
my hand up.
I understand that. I'm not recognizing you for your own protection.
I am asking to be recognized. I get to determine whether or not I want to be recognized.
That's right, and I get to determine when. So, there's a whole lot of horses. Are there any other comments?
The executive director for Vermont NEA was in the room at the last meeting. You have an open contract with Vermont NEA that has not yet been renewed. There are no terms. You did it in open session with the executive director in the room. So I
Okay.
feel
I will say in
that
open session-
so I feel to treat this bit differently when there is not a contract that is up for renewal, and Visbit's executive director, who is myself, is in the room, is treating your two organizations differently. I want you to be aware of that when you make your determination.
That was
So-
definitely not my intent, since I'm the one on record for making the motion, that was not my intent, was to treat you any differently than anyone else has been treated, Laura. I thought my issue is more with the presidency and what'll happen there, which was you specifically. At this point, I withdraw my motion.
So the suggestion there is that Visbit and Vermont NEA should be treated equivalently with respect to process. Is that right?
I've already made my
Is that
statement.
right? Isn't that right? I'm asking you.
I'm asking you not to recast your statements.
I've made my statement.
Okay. My point about all of this is that Visbit apparently has already acted unilaterally to change the contract by directing Laura to resign as our president. See, this is the problem with when I write, or any of us writes somebody with questions and doesn't get answers beforehand, we get,
So I'd like to,
I'm not recognizing you yet, I'm recognizing Laura because
thank
she raised
You're
her
right.
hand.
So I am currently a corporate officer of VEHI. It's in your bylaws that you have a president who's a corporate officer and a secretary. Martha is the secretary. You appointed me, now not you, the individual people in this room, but the board in, I believe it was 2014, appointed me president. Visbit did not appoint me to the role,
And it's not in the contract.
and it is not part of the service agreement. The word president does not show up in the service agreement. So
It
the
does in
discretion,
scope of services.
so the scope of services is a draft working document that has not been adopted or amended to the service agreement that Visbit is offering that you do so that you quantify. It has had multiple forms. Bob sent the most recent form that the Visbit board put together. As your president, so my board has directed me, for reasons that they put in the letter, to resign as of November 1st. I have, for your benefit, done a word search of every organizational document you have to find where the term president is, so that you have clarity on how you've used that term in documents. Now, when I say clarity, I don't mean that whoever put the document together thought through all the ramifications, but I mean that the term is being used. My expectation is that you will look at legal counsel to think about which of these duties truly belong to a corporate officer and need to be moved into that realm, whoever takes that position after me, and which of these duties are actually appropriate for VISBIT to carry out as part of its administrative agreement, and that to the degree that the VISBIT board and the VI board feel differently, you two will work out the service agreement part. So I put together, and this is simply.
Before you hand it out,
No,
what is
I'm
it?
gonna hand it out. This is simply excerpts where the word president is named, and the complete documents are in the Dropbox. So that's the resources you have as you think about that role in the future.
Now I'm done. So I think I was next.
Wait a minute.
Okay.
Tracy.
So, I think that the concern of VISBIT is that Laura is in the position of president of the corporation and has the duties of corporate officer, which is probably not an appropriate function for the, for a non-employee. It should be an employee, we don't have any, it should be a board member. It does not mean that the person in Laura's position should not be the chief executive officer, or whatever vocabulary you want, that we have associated with the president and have embedded in our job descriptions. And I think Laura's work here is a good start. My suggestion is that a resolution, or a next step in resolving this, is for Joel and I to work together to get legal counsel to make sure that we understand as a board what the responsibilities of a corporate officer are, how best to handle that. Is there something that you'd like to
Yeah, I'll.
chime in when you're ready?
I will.
Okay, thanks. What the roles and responsibilities are of a corporate officer, what are the options for a corporation, nonprofit or otherwise, to fulfill those when we don't have employees. And separate from that, revisit the scope of services with VISBIT. But I think the next step is simply to answer those two questions and figure out how we fulfill the role of president of the corporation.
Can I ask how you came to that conclusion, Tracy? That VISBIT thinks, how they got there, just how did you get to that?
I read the memo and I have some background and familiarity with corporate structure.
So is there some background that we should have as well? Because I read the memo as well.
Yeah.
And I feel like there's a lot that I didn't get
So
by reading the memo.
That's
So what's
why I'm
behind it?
thinking, let's get
Two
legal counsel to come in and answer those questions, so it's not necessarily me, because I know we're working on trust.
Mhm.
And if Joel and I can find legal counsel that would help us with those simple questions, or if there's more to the story, they can tell us that, but I think that that's an appropriate next step that I'd like to recommend.
Sort of two things, Tracy. The first is, I'm glad to hear it, but I've really never heard you articulate the potential for just two members of the board to meet with anybody. It's always been the full board. That's fine, I approve of it. I
Well,
think
if they authorize us to do
I
that.
think it's appropriate for the chair and vice chair to do that. The second thing, I forget what the second thing is, so I'll let it go. And
Well, there was something that you were
No,
changing.
that was the thing. Fran.
I would welcome that some legal advisor, because in my initial read on it, I mean, my gut is VISBIT telling us that we have to change our official documents and positions, and I'm a little unclear why they should be telling us what we need to be doing.
Well,
And-
that's really one of the questions that we might.
And so, I think we need
articulate
some legal, answers
John.
to what VISBIT is asking us or telling us to do, and what authority they have to do that, and what then, how we're supposed to respond to it.
Certainly, those were the items in my mind.
So I would make a motion that the chair and the vice chair consult with legal counsel to answer the questions that just came on the table, and maybe I need to be more specific about those questions,
I
but I
personally
would.
don't think you need to be more specific. I would like to say I'm a lawyer and say, what the heck do you see here? And here are the questions I have, and here are the questions that Tracy has. I was going to open the meeting to what questions are in your minds, and we can do that. But I think a general motion is better than one that proscribes us from asking things not made explicit.
Second motion. Oh, sorry, Fran.
No, it's okay, you can go ahead and second motion.
Who seconded this?
Fran did. We
Okay.
both
Is
spoke up.
there any need to discuss that? Because that's pretty much where we were headed. I will have a question after the act on it. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Laura, do you know the name of the council that Jessica's been using?
Yes, it's in the minutes. It's Arlene Duffy from Sheedy, Furlong, and Bem.
Just wanted to know who not.
Yes, it's in the
Right.
Visbit,
Yes.
Visbit minutes, yes.
Well, you know, I mean, I've assumed for years that Rob has acted as legal counsel in many ways for both Visbit and VEHI.
He has been the corporate attorney for both, and
Yes, and
Visbit
so I made
sought
a
it
quick and
different.
easy assumption that it might have been Rob Halford, at which point we would have to go hunting. We may still want to go hunting,
But you and I have to figure that out.
but good. All right. Item. Now we act on, forgive me, I'm obviously losing, did we act on the budget?
Yes,
We
you
did
did.
the budget, that's right, I thought so.
Budget.
I knew the word
Wait,
wording in the.
Before we leave 11, should we consider a joint letter from Joel and Tracy saying we've received your communication and we're working on it?
That might be a good idea. I make that motion.
Is that required?
I think just to acknowledge that we've gotten the letter.
Well, and especially since there's questions about the process we've used so far.
We pretty well know we will receive the letter.
But
Laura can communicate that on our behalf. We already did, we
All right,
communicated to
fine.
Visbit's CEO.
I think it would be respectful. We'll talk process next time, since we've already agreed that'll be on the agenda.
Can we do management updates backwards?
Okay, I think we should, you mean, should we adjourn first?
No, can we do CBA? Can we do
By all
CBA?
means, go ahead. Whatever sequence you folks want to use on 15, go ahead.
So Mark, Bobby, Joe, and I wrote a letter that goes in our annual report. It's an FYI for you. The annual report's getting put together now. It'll be out later this month. If you have questions about it, we're happy to take those, but it was merely an FYI. I think we've already discussed the interstate analysis. We have been doing a lot of work on that. We will have a recommendation for action at the September meeting. We will want you to take action at that meeting, one way or another, on this project. We'll be ready for that. We aren't ready now, so I can't give you any preview of what our recommendation will be, but we've been doing work in that arena. And finally, again, there's really no action for you at this time. Blue Cross did send out an RFP last week, as they anticipated. They invited, I believe, 5 vendors. I don't believe that's public information as to who they invited, but they invited 5 vendors. They are looking for their book of business for a preferred HRA vendor. They have a preferred HSA vendor with Health Equity. They are looking for a preferred HRA vendor. They will give them a sort of special relationship where they will have updated, what's it called, Bobby Joe? File feed, enrollment feed,
The eligibility.
eligibility files. They'll not only send claims, they'll send eligibility files, they'll get better pricing, they'll have accountability. So they will, VEHI and our members are not obligated to use that vendor, but they have invited VEHI to help vet and get involved with that vendor. So at some point, we will be involved. They will actually use VEHI's experience this past year with the vendors to help give questions and role plays and sort of put this vendor through their paces, because they don't want somebody who can't respond to VEHI, even if VEHI doesn't use the vendor. So we'll let you know what they decide and what our impression is after we get to participate. And eventually we can talk about what that means for us. I think it's premature to know
I agree.
anything else.
Yeah, that's all we know so far.
Move to adjourn.
And you want this back next, or
Next.
mail it in or bring it to the
However,
next meeting?
however you like. And again, you know, I tried my hand at some notion of language, but
You do have a meeting
you all
September
on the
24th,
24th. What time? 4:30.
4:30.
I won't be here, folks, sorry, I apologize, but that is our only option, I have to be,
Can't
I'm
read
on,
it.
so I'm about today.
Nerd.
I know, I screwed something up,
Do you want to relook? No,
Sorry?
you will meet without Peggy.
Well,
I'm sorry, I can't.
Just leave the door unlocked.
With a note on the door. Hi parents, I'm sorry, I'm not here.